When you speak of Marlene, you speak up with her with a great fondness and expression in your face that, I've sat here 700 times. So you get to see who matters most to people in their lives just by looking at their face. And she's clearly on the podium.
Yeah, she's a very feisty little lady, very short and very forceful. She taught me a lot about being, pugnacious and fighting for what you want and what you need in life. And and we argued a lot when I was a kid, and I think that maybe forged some of my current political argumentation as well. My wife is a big part of it as well. She's a very strong, feisty, intelligent lady with an incredible upbringing as well. She's a refugee from Venezuela and came with really nothing. And so she has this sort of MacGyver-like skill set to get anything done, no matter how difficult the logistics. So I've been very, very blessed with strong women around me.
At a very young age, it appears that you took a liking to politics. You mentioned hockey first, and Marlene taking you to hockey. I've got found a couple of photos of you playing hockey, which I found to be quite interesting. But
yes.
But politics. When did politics come into your psyche?
I would have been kind of in my mid-teens. Well, I got into football, hurt my back in football, so I couldn't stay on the team. My mother had always gone to these sort of local conservative meetings, sometimes just bringing baked goods or attending a volunteer meeting. And I said, well, why don't you bring me to one of those? Because I'm bored out of my skull. And she did. This gives me meaning. This gives me purpose. I want to go and pursue this. So I started getting more and more involved. I got an internship, making almost no money, and I'm dressing up in a used suit, and really threw myself fully into this mission.
One of the books that I realized you'd read at that time from some research is this book, Adam Smith, The Theory of Moral Sentiments.
Yes. So this book has to be accompanied by its more famous sister book, which is The Wealth of Nations, which that's the book that most people know Adam Smith for. They think of him as kind of the father of capitalism, because in 1776, he wrote this book which described what we now call the free market system. And this was a really revolutionary idea, because up until then, we basically had various forms of feudalism.
What's that?
Where a small group of lords and knights and aristocrats control all the land, and the great masses do all the work. And so you called them serfs. They would do all the heavy labor, and then the lords of the manor would take all of the benefit. Along came the system of free enterprise that Adam Smith describes, which is basically, it has a very simple premise: voluntary exchange of work for wages, product for payment, and investment for interest. And that the economy, rather than being guided by the iron fist of the king or the state, is guided by the invisible hand of the free market. And this had been thought that this was crazy. How could the economy just sort of run itself? And the answer is through price signals. If the price of something goes up, people just automatically start making more of it. And if you need more workers to make that thing, well, you raise the wages, and all of a sudden, what do you know? The workers arrive. And this system is absolutely ingenious. Like, it's why when you go into a coffee shop and you buy your coffee, you say thank you. They don't say you're welcome. They say thank you, because they have something worth more to them than they had before, the money, and you have something worth more to you than you had before. And this voluntary exchange puts everyone on an equal scale. Even if you're a massive corporation, you want to sell something to a 15-year-old kid, you have to convince him that it's worth more than the cost. So everybody has to be better off in the exchange for it to occur. And that was how free enterprise formed. And it has led to a spectacular increase in the quality of living and the economic growth, 200-fold increase in economic growth in the free enterprise era versus the feudal era. So a lot of people thought Adam Smith is only interested in a system where people are out serving themselves, their self-interest. That's what they took from the statement in The Wealth of Nations, that it is not from the benevolence of the brewer, the baker, or the butcher that we get our meal, but from his own self-interest. But that was only half the story. The other half was in this book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, in which he explains how self-interest overlaps with virtue. So what he said is that we have something called fellow feeling, which is to say we feel for the other person. And we feel good when someone else does good. It's why we explain that, people donate to charity, or they leave the door open for a stranger, or they might help an injured person on the street, because they feel bad when they see someone else, their fellow, suffering, and they feel good when they see him succeeding. And that's why it's called sentiments, because you feel these things. I saw this in my own son. He, for the first time, he got a little toy and he gave it to his sister. It was the first gift he'd ever given in his life. And he was so happy. Like, he literally ran in a big circle around the foyer of our residence and just laughing and screaming. It just made him so happy, happier than she was to even receive it. And this is the best of human nature, that his interest, his happiness was served by seeing his sister better off. And this is really laid out in some detail in the theory of moral sentiments. And for me, it's like, it brings together all of human nature in one place. Now, he's not naive. He does accept that there are bad, dark angels in our nature, but he gives the only plausible explanation that I have seen about how you intersect self-interest with altruism.
And how did that change your perspective and therefore, your policies and your career?
I have found that those who push a socialist ideology have a gross contradiction in their view of human nature. They say that human beings are wretched, self-interested, greedy when they're in the private, voluntary economy, but they're angels when they're in the governmental economy. And therefore, they argue that the government should just control everything, because then we have all these angels that will decide for us, decide what we get to, how our money is spent, what we're supposed to believe in the modern day, what kind of vehicles we drive, what we should think. But that is a huge contradiction. If man is not capable of deciding for himself, surely he's not capable of deciding for others. And I think the worst vices in human nature come out when there is too much power and concentrated in their hands. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So my ideology is that we should disperse power, that it should be a bottom-up system with as much freedom and agency as humanly possible, that people should be free to choose for themselves, and that the purpose of the government is to do only those things people cannot do for themselves.
I guess if there's, socialists listening now, they might think, well, we tried this sort of capitalistic approach to the economy, and it's resulted in us being able to buy less food and vegetables for our money. The price has gone up at the pumps. People are struggling. It seems that inequality has widened, and the working class seem to be struggling more now than ever before. They can't buy homes anymore, like my parents or my grandparents could have. So clearly we need socialism, they would argue, because the current system has not worked.
Well, what we have now is socialism for the very rich. We have governments that are actively redistributing wealth from the working class to the very, very wealthy. And that is why we see record inequality. Government is actively intervening in the economy to forcefully redistribute wealth up the chain.
Up the chain?
Absolutely. And there are countless examples of it. When they block home building with heavy regulations, they limit the supply of homes. Those who have mansions, therefore, are richer because their houses are worth more. But young people, newcomers, working class people can't actually get a home. That is one example of state intervention. Well, we could maybe do an illustration here.
Okay, so this is the total amount of land in Canada.
Yes.
Where homes could be built. And actually,
Yes.
This is quite reflective, I think, of much of the Western world,
Yes.
Even the UK. And this is a penny.
Yes.
Do you understand this demonstration?
Yes, I think what you're trying to say is that this is about how much land we live on.
Yes.
Yes. So Canada is a great example of this, because we have 10 times as much land per person as the second closest G7 country. And yet we have the fewest homes per capita to live in. And why is that? It's because that the vast majority of the cost that goes into building a new home is not land, labor, or lumber. It's government. It's government taxes, fees, charges, bureaucracy, lobbyists, consultants. So if you think of this home here in Canada, when you buy this house, more of the money for your purchase would go to bureaucrats in office buildings than to the carpenters, electricians, and plumbers who actually build the home.
Why? How?
Because the bureaucracy has grown like any organism in nature, which seeks to survive and multiply. They give us the second slowest building permits of any country in the OECD. They charge enormous development taxes, which started out just to pay for plumbing and roads for the related housing, but now have grown into just a huge cash cow for local governments because sales taxes still apply on most new homes. And all of that gets sponged up by government and means that we have extremely expensive housing. In fact, we are the most expensive in the G7, even though it should be dirt cheap to own a home in Canada because we have the most dirt to build on. And my goal is to remove all of that bureaucracy, have the fastest permits in the world, and make it tax-free to build homes so that everyone can afford one.
I was reading some stat that said, again, I might butcher this a little bit, but it said that Canada needs to build between roughly 450,000 new homes every single year until 2035.
Yes.
Just to restore affordability.
That's right. And we're building about 240,000 per year. So we need to roughly double our home building to do that. The good news is we have 100,000, well, it's not good news. We have 100,000 unemployed construction workers who'd be happy to pick up a hammer and start building. We have hundreds of billions of dollars of investment that's ready to do it. We have an abundance of land. What we need are fast permits and low taxes so that we can unlock that building.
What is the case for slow permits?
There isn't one.
There isn't one?
Zero. There is no benefit to having slow permits. They do not protect the environment. They do not protect public safety. We used to build houses a lot faster and they didn't fall down. After the Second World War, permits were almost instantaneous. We had a massive buildup of homes so that our returning veterans could have a place to live. In many neighborhoods of Canada, those homes are still standing. They have not collapsed. I'm not saying we get rid of building codes. They should all have to follow standards of environmental responsibility and be fire resistant and safe. But it shouldn't take 7 years to approve a subdivision to do that. We know how the developers know how to build according to the rules. They just need quick permits and freed up land to do it.
You'd think now with AI, you'd be able to approve these permits within minutes.
Like with all the technology, housing should be so much cheaper than it was before. In fact, everything should be so much cheaper. But this is another area where government is redistributing wealth from the working class to the super rich. It's the monetary inflation where we're creating cash at a far faster rate than we're creating the stuff that cash buys. We've, in Canada, increased the number of homes over the last 10 years by 13%, but we've increased the money supply by 100%. In other words, there is now the growth in the money supply is 8 times faster than the growth in the housing supply.
Which means for the average person
that it bids up the price. Now, you might say, well, if everybody's equally getting their share of that money, then who cares? But they're not. There's something called the Catalan effect, which is that the first people to touch the money in a monetary expansion are those who are already wealthy and already connected to the financial system. So when government creates cash to fund its deficits, it doesn't just dump the bills out of an airplane into a suburban neighborhood. It injects it into the banking system by buying government bonds at inflated prices. And those who trade in those bonds are the first to get the cash. Those connected to the financial system are the first to borrow it. They get to deploy it before it loses its value. By the time it trickles down to the working class people, it's lost its value and their wages have been destroyed. And this has been happening on and off throughout all of human history, but it's been particularly bad in the last 55 years. And that is why I think the working class across the Western world is so angry.
Canada have consistently dropped down the sort of happiness league table.
Well, actually, from 2015, we've gone from 5th to 25th. The 18th we went from 18th to 25th just in the last year.
So you were the 5th happiest country in the world, and now you're 25th.
That's right. And part of it is food. We have the worst food price inflation in the G7 today. It's due to a lot of hidden taxes that are baked into food production. We have an industrial carbon tax that it charges on farm equipment, fertilizer, and food producers. We have a new fuel tax that's just come in. Single-use plastic is now banned, which makes it so that food goes bad about 5 days quicker. So it sounds kind of very virtuous. We're not going to use plastic anymore, but it ultimately means food goes bad, and somebody pays for that. So I want to get rid of all of those taxes and fees and unnecessary regulations that do nothing for our health and safety, so that we can have more affordable food. But more broadly, we have to get rid of the monetary inflation that I described. As I said, we've doubled our money supply in Canada from 1.4 trillion to 2.8 trillion in 10 years. So it is not actually that these things cost more. It's that the money with which we buy them is worth less.
Because
we're creating so much of it. And
why are you doing that?
To fund deficits.
To pay for debts.
That's right. And that's why all government, it's not just Canada, by the way, it's across the Western world. They're creating cash to fund deficits.
And the deficits come from having a big government.
Yes.
A government that's too big.
That's right.
That's too involved.
That's right. And the result is that we're creating cash faster than we grow food, build homes, or produce energy. And my mission, Stephen, is to flip that. I want us to create more of what cash buys by unblocking food production, energy production, and home building, so that we add those things faster than we add the cash to the system.
I saw this graph here, this chart, which is GDP per capita with international counterparts. So on there it has Canada, United States, OECD, and it shows, it's quite stark. It shows that Canada has basically plateaued in terms of GDP per capita. For the average person, what is GDP per capita? What does that actually mean?
It's your income, really. It's ultimately, the GDP, the gross domestic product, is the value of all the things that you produce. If you're producing more per person, over time, people will see their wages rise, their real wages rise. If you don't produce more per person, then your wages are flat. And so that is what we've effectively had in Canada over the last 10 years.
Why?
Because we are not unlocking our resources. Our biggest industry is oil and gas, and it's locked behind very aggressive anti-development laws and bureaucracies, because we're blocking home building, and because we're overtaxing our population. We're punishing initiative with high taxes. The good news is that we can reverse all of these things. If we have the most pro-development and the fastest permits in the world, if we cut taxes on work, investment, home building, and energy, then we can massively increase our output of the things that we need to have a good life and the wages that people earn to buy it.
This seems to be a familiar story across some Western nations.
It is.
What are those Western nations, and what is the thing that they've all got wrong in common?
Well, I think that it's probably true in the UK and the European Union as well.
What did they do wrong?
Well, let's take Germany. They shut down their nuclear sector, and they tried to effectively drive oil and gas out of their country. The end result was extremely high energy costs. And this was another intervention that took from working class people and gave to the very rich. Those who were able to get the subsidies for windmills and solar panels got fabulously wealthy, all very powerful people. But the workers in the plants and the mines of rural Germany ended up losing their jobs and paying higher prices for electricity, all of which, by the way, has been reversed because now the Germans are back to burning coal. So it did absolutely nothing for the environment. This is another example of government intervention totally screwing over the working class, a phenomenon across the Western world. And this is the big lie. The big lie is that when government gets big, it gives people their fair share. What it does, in fact, is it gives the money and the resources to those who have the most political power. Those people are all rich, and it pays for it by taking from the working class. So my mission in politics is to reverse that entire approach, have a small government with big people, a meritocracy that rewards work, and a free enterprise system that requires businesses compete for workers with higher wages and consumers with lower prices.
I'm looking here at the GDP forecasts for various countries around the world. In the United States, GDP forecast looks like it's been pretty strong relative to others. Canada looks like it's going down. 2025 estimates 1.7%, 26 estimates 1.3%. The United Kingdom as well seems to have been lagging. Both the United States and Canada. And Germany, as you said, in 2024, their GDP growth was only 0.2, which is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of percentages lower than the United States, Canada, or even the UK. But clearly there is a problem with GDP growth here for Canada, for the United States, for the United Kingdom, relative to a country like the United States. It looks like the United States are doing something right. If you look at GDP growth as the main measure.
Look, there are some policies that we can learn from. It's not just the United States, though. Look at Switzerland, for example. The Swiss are among the wealthiest in the world. They have the best money, the lowest inflation. They have almost no inflation in Switzerland, by the way. They have very strong money. The Swiss franc is the best currency in the world, better than the euro or the American dollar. What do they have? Free enterprise, small government. The share of the economy consumed by government spending is significantly lower than anywhere else in the Western world. Outside of Asia. And so they do very well. How is it that the Singaporeans have become one of the wealthiest nations on earth? They have no resources, literally nothing. They have to import their water, for God's sakes. They took a swampy, mosquito-infested island and three peoples who were struggling to survive in their homelands, and they came together and created the wealthiest country in the world outside of the Gulf states. Why? They have free enterprise. They have low taxes. It's easy to start a business. You're rewarded for your hard work. This is the kind of thing we could be doing.
So looking at the numbers of Singapore, Singapore operates in a league of its own, outperforming both the UK, Canada, and the USA in terms of growth and per capita wealth. As a hub economy, it is currently riding the wave of the global AI boom because they've enabled entrepreneurship. And it is more than, from a GDP perspective, last year, more than double the United States GDP growth. And I mean, it's left Canada and the United Kingdom and even Switzerland in its tracks in that regard. Interesting.
It's a spectacular achievement. I mean, Lee Kuan Yew, who founded the country and created this miracle, should be studied by every leader in the world, because I don't think there's anyone who's been able to generate such a massive increase in the quality of life, and to do it with literally no resources whatsoever, except for geography. And they managed to exploit their geography, as you said, to be kind of like modern day Nabateans. They're a trading hub for all of Asia.
Every sort of economic policy or philosophy does have a trade-off. I mean, it's one thing you learn as a podcaster, that there's just always trade-offs. And if you're not clear on what the trade-offs are, then they might surprise you.
Right.
I mean, you can talk about socialism or you can talk about capitalism, whatever. All of them have trade-offs. What are the trade-offs of your economic strategy and philosophy?
Well, the leadership has to have humility, because it has to let go of power and turn it back to the people. And that is a very hard thing for politicians to do. I mean, no politician wants to have written on their gravestone, he stayed out of the way, left people alone so that they could do great things without him. Although I think we'd be better off if more of them did. But I should also say that, like, there is a role for government. I'm not suggesting that there isn't. There should be a basic social safety net that provides the things that people who are less advantaged would not be able to have for themselves, to make sure that everyone has health care, even if they can't afford to pay for it, that there's basic schooling and roads and infrastructure. But what happens is that once you get beyond providing those basics and government starts to metastasize into, all kinds of other things that are not its core responsibility, each dollar spent has less and less return. And then it turns into a negative return, where the more they spend, the more damage they do. And I think we're beyond that point on the curve.
Because I'm thinking about how immigration ties into all of this and to GDP growth. I think in Canada, from the research I was doing, there has been a decline in birth rates.
Yes.
So there's significantly less people getting married. There's significantly less people being born. So how does one run their economy when you're not having new children being born without bringing in lots of immigrants to help support that economy?
Well, first of all, I think we have to ask ourselves, why has the birth rate gone down? And I would argue that it's economic reasons. If you cannot afford a home, then you have no place to raise children. We have this phenomenon in Canada of 35-year-olds still living in their parents' basements. And how do you even get a date? I mean, how do you bring a date home? It's a challenge. Wow. If you're 35, and these are great high-achieving people who've got jobs, but they just can't afford a place to live. or they're stuck in a small apartment because that's all their paycheck will buy them in the way of rent. And so I think for those economic constraints, we have a lot of young people who otherwise would love to have children in their late 20s, early 30s, who simply have nowhere to raise them.